Record. Hello, everyone. It is Gina here, and today for our Feminine Roadmap Inspires, I have for you Beth Wilson Parentice. She is the author of You Glow Girl. She is also the founder of SIPP Sparkling Organics, and she's going to be sharing her inspirational story, her incredible story of how she took an idea of creating a beverage from her kitchen to a multi-million-dollar business. So Beth, I want to thank you for being with me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
It's my pleasure. And I wanted to kind of fill the audience in about how you and I became friends, because I have the pleasure of not only having you on my show, but having you on my show as a friend of mine. So it's actually been 2 years since we've met now. We were at an event in Arizona, right? It was called Growth.
Yes. Yeah.
And we had connected. Beth had been in a breakout session with my youngest daughter, and we got to talking after the whole event was over, and she was kind of sharing her story, and I was like, oh my gosh, you need to be on my podcast. Not true, right? I was like, yeah, stop.
It was true. And it actually made me feel like, oh, wow, I'm special. And of course, like going to that conference, like I wasn't really sure, what actually a friend of mine bought me a ticket for my birthday. And I was like, I don't know what this is. And, I knew who one of the speakers there, was, which was great. And I liked him and I thought he was very inspiring. And I read his books. I was like, that's cool. And I'm going with her, which is great. But beyond that, I wasn't really sure about the whole thing. And I think, through that and meeting people, especially you, it made me realize that I have a story to tell and share with other women that I think could definitely be inspirational. And sometimes it works like that, doesn't it? It's like we don't see it in ourselves, right. But when you have somebody, telling you, and when I was telling my girlfriend, I was like, oh, I met this woman, Gina, she's great. And she was like really inspired by my story. And I don't really know. And she was like, you don't even see that in yourself, and I don't, like, I've been telling you that. And I'm like, oh, okay, I know. So it's, I'm really fortunate that we met, and through that event, it opened up my eyes to, kind of my experience and what I accomplished and how valuable that is to share my story. And somebody there said to me, if you don't share your story, you're doing a disservice to people. And somehow that statement resonated with me because I don't want to disappoint anybody.
The people pleaser in you was like, oh, yes. Okay, I'll do that.
Yes, the people pleaser in me was like, oh my gosh, I have to tell my story now. But it was kind of like that light bulb moment that did it for me. That was like, wow, I kind of see that now. So
I loved the fact that we built a relationship. And I remember when you sent me your first chapter.
Yeah.
And I read the whole thing, and then I sent it back. I was so excited because I'm like, when I met her, she was like, well, I'm thinking about writing this book and this is the title I'm thinking of, what do you think? And I was like, oh my gosh, you totally need to do this. So it was really exciting to watch you walk that journey. And then for me to actually hold it in my hot little hand 2 years later. So yeah. I just think it's incredible. But before we just like girlfriend it out here, I want you to let people know why I thought was inspirational and what your friends saw as inspirational.
Yeah.
How you got to this point of writing this book. So tell us a little bit about your story.
Yeah. So I had no intention whatsoever to go into the beverage industry. Like, I don't come from the beverage industry. I never worked for the big beverage brands or did any formulation. But when I was laid off from my corporate position, I had to figure out, do I want to go back to a corporate job or do I want to do something more creative? And I gave myself a couple of months, and my friends were like, you love to entertain, you love to make cocktails, you love parties, you should do something with that. So I actually created a website called Eco Bar, which was organic cocktails. And that's what I was doing. I was making in my own home, was all natural cocktails, because I couldn't find any cocktail mixers on the market that were natural or organic. Like, if you look at I always laugh about this, the margarita mix that you see, I think if you turn the lights off, like, it literally glows in the dark. Like it's got that much like green preservatives in it.
You know, I wondered because it kind of looks like glow in the dark paint. It's actually the same
Yeah,
color.
exactly. And don't ever read the ingredient panel, or no, do, because you will be freaked out.
I'm gonna die if I drink this without the alcohol.
Right. So yeah, so I set out to kind of like create that alternative solution. And I just started putting it up on a website, and then I started to get contacted to do events and like go to these events and make the cocktails. So I was like, okay, this is what I'm doing now. I'm doing Eco Bar is like my cocktail catering business. So I was doing that for 2 years, and I was catering to events actually with the 76ers in Philadelphia. And the event planner that I was working with, she was like, Beth, everybody's talking about your cocktails, but they're not talking about the fundraiser that we're here to like raise money for. So can you like tone it down a little bit? And I thought, well, that was interesting. Like, should I just make like vodkas and club soda or like, and she was like, your drinks are too good. And it hit me at that event, actually with the 76ers. This woman came up to me and she was like, this is the best drink I have ever had in my life. What is in this? And I said, it's blackberries, mint, and lime. I can tell you how to make it. And she was like, okay. I said, get blackberries and mint and you muddle them in a glass. She's like, whoa, I don't even know what a muddler is. I don't know what you're talking about. And I don't want to buy 3 ingredients to make one drink. And that was like my light bulb moment. I was like, wait, could I create what I'm creating in my kitchen and bring it to these events and put it in a bottle? And have 3 layers of flavor and have it be natural, no preservatives, no coloring, and organic. And so that's what I set out to do with no beverage experience.
And you did all of this in your kitchen, like you were creating the recipes yourself, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So how did you go from your kitchen to building it into a business? What was that?
It's funny. Like one of my funny stories is that I didn't know what I was doing. So I was like, there has to be like a beverage consultant, you know, that tells you like how to build a beverage business out there. So I started researching and I found this woman who had been in the beverage industry for like 25 years and she does consulting now. I was like, this is awesome. She's a woman. I'm a woman. She's going to help me. And so I got a call with her. And then at the end of the call, and after kind of talking to her for an hour, she was like, if you don't have like, you know, $20 million, she was like, you know, I would just like walk away right now. She was like, it's just so impossible. And 25% of beverage businesses fail. So, I mean, 85% of beverage businesses fail. So, you know, I would just walk away right now. And it really discouraged me because I got off the phone. I was like, oh, it's like, you know, she was a woman. I thought she was going to be like, you know, inspiring me. So I was like, oh yeah, forget it. I can't do this. So I went to bed and then I woke up in the morning and I had this like aha moment of like, wait a minute. If 85% of all beverage businesses fail, that means 15% succeed. So why can't I be in the 15%?
Right.
Like, so I was like, screw her. I'm doing this.
Yes.
So maybe in a way I should thank her now that I think back on it. It's like, you know, because of that, she was the one that was like, I was like, no, I'm doing this. So with the, you know, the wonderful world of Google, it's like you can basically find out everything. You just have to take the time to do it, you know, Google it, like, you know, where do you make beverages and how do you find the, you know, the bottles and the caps. And so I just spent, you know, the next couple of weeks like researching that and then found like a company that could create the flavors that I could send to production. So I called them and I was like, oh, you know, I have this, you know, no, first I called the plant to tell them that I have like a recipe that I want them to run in bottles.
Uh-huh.
And I thought I could just give them my kitchen recipe and they laughed at me.
Oh.
I was like, oh, I can't
blackberries.
I can't use like 10 blackberries and like 1 slice of lime and like 3 leaves of mint and multiply it by 1,000. They're like, no, you need a production formula. Click. So that's when I set out to find a flavor company that could make my flavor ideas like into a production formula. And when I was calling them, they were like, yeah, we can do it. You know, as a cost like $20,000. And I was like, oh, this is probably what that consultant was referring to. She's like, you need a lot of money to do this. And so I just, at that point was like, I guess I can't do it because I was doing it on a shoestring. And then I decided I was going to take 1 week and call every flavor company I could find and just tell my story and hope that I found somebody that would maybe do it as like a deferred cost, or I don't know. I just was like, let me just try. And so I remember on Wednesday, I got a hold of this guy who was the director of business development for this flavor company, and he just landed from a flight and he was in his car. He was kind of irritated because I found his cell phone online on a conference listing. On a conference listing.
So you went total stalker status.
I did. But that's the thing, is like, that's what you have to do. I mean, if you think about it, so the story is that thankfully I enticed him to stay on the phone after telling him my concept. I'm like, okay, it's an all natural beverage. It's 3 layers of flavor. When you sip it, it's called SIPP, and you sip it, you taste 3 layers of flavor. So you taste blackberry, mint, and lime. And the other one I have is ginger, vanilla, lime. So you sip it, you taste ginger, vanilla, lime. He's like, this is interesting. I haven't heard about a beverage. It's now, granted, this was 10 years ago, but I haven't heard of a beverage that has 3 flavors. I have a proposal for you. We're doing a trade show in California in a week and a half. If you can fly out there and pitch our entire team at the trade show, we pick 1 entrepreneur a year and do all their flavor formulations at no cost for life. And Seth Godin who was the founder of Honest Tea. He was one of those people that like went with them. So I was like, okay, I have to do this. So I scrounged up all my last money that I had to get my flight and hotel, went out there, pitched it, and they chose me. And they worked with me to create all my flavor formulations at no cost. So I guess like the moral of the story is like, if I didn't do that research and like dedicate myself that week to just be like, I'm going to find every single person I can. And whether that means I'm calling them on their cell phone after they're tired of their, after their 6-hour flight and pitching my story, then, that's what it takes. If it's something you really want to make happen. And SIPP wouldn't be here today if it weren't for that phone call. And it's funny, I just talked to him last week and told him that. I was like, it was because of you, because you believed in me, that gave me the opportunity to prove to myself that I could create something in my kitchen that was nothing to a multi-million-dollar national brand sold in stores like Target.
I remember you telling me a piece of that story was when you were in your hotel room crying. You
Yes.
need to share that, because that really is an honest part of the journey and the fear that you were facing, because you'd kind of leveraged everything to go to California because you're on the East Coast.
Yeah.
So you had to come here on a gamble because he didn't promise you anything.
No.
So what was happening in your head in that hotel room?
And I was pitching an idea that like I didn't even know if it truly would be successful. You know what I mean? Like I bought bottles off of eBay and I made fake labels from my printer and I put them on the bottle and filled them with the liquid and took pictures of them if they were real, and then printed postcards on Vistaprint as my thing that I passed out to all the people at the flavor company when I went to California. And I was like, this is what it is. But like, I really had no idea. So I think it was a combination of, I guess, stepping outside of my comfort zone. Like, I had been married for years and my husband and I always did everything together. We couldn't afford for him to go. I wanted him to go with me badly. But we couldn't afford. And also my son was young at the time, so it made sense for him to stay at home and be with him. And I guess what I didn't foresee is like, once I got to California, where the trade show was adjacent to Disneyland. So the shuttle that I took to my hotel was all families on the shuttle because they were all, going to Disneyland in Anaheim. And this is what started my breakdown. I'm on the shuttle because that's all I can afford. So you have to stop at 25 to 30 hotels before you get to yours. And you're subjected to families with little kids all excited to go to Disneyland. And I'm there without my child at the time, who was probably 7 or 8. So
perfect Disneyland age.
I missed him already, like after being gone for just, half a day. And I was just thinking of these kids, and I was like, I want my son to be here with me. What am I doing? And it just started this sort of emotional downward spiral. And being on that shuttle for over an hour and a half before I finally got to my hotel, that's kind of what started it. Then when I got to the hotel and I got into the room by myself and I knew that I had to go over to the trade show and present to them in a couple of hours, I was like, what am I doing? Like, I don't even know how to present. I'm not in the beverage industry. Like, I've never even been to this trade show. Like, what is the Natural Products Expo? Like, I didn't even know what that was. So it was all this like unknown. And then the fact that my husband wasn't with me and I'm like by myself, and it just became this huge, I was just filled with anxiety, started crying. And after an hour, I knew I had to pull myself together. It's like, I got to get it together. I just have to do that. I'm here, right? I already dedicated the time. I dedicated the last bit of money that I had to get there. So I'm like, I have to do it. And I think that's the thing, is like, how do you push yourself through something like that? And I think if it's something that you really believe in, you just have to do it.
Yeah. And you don't have to know how. One of my mentors says, let go of the need to know how.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because
I like that, because I think sometimes we think that we have to, well, we should know this. Like,
right.
I'm thinking, what is this trade show? I should know. Like, I've never been here before. How do you present at a trade show? What are they in a booth? And I'm going to like go in and like, I should know all these things.
Yeah.
But the reality is that I didn't. I went to the booth and they were all there, and they had a table in their booth. So it was two booths long. So they had a table. So I sat down and presented to them, and I just, spoke from my heart and my passion.
That's such an incredible story, because everything looks on the outside sometimes like this can't happen. This can't work. Like the belief has to come before the reality. I think
Yes.
a lot of the times we're waiting for the social proof or the proof from something before we put belief into it. But
Yeah.
I think what inspires me most about your story is you just thought, I like my idea. I like my drinks. I want to do this thing. And you literally did it in your kitchen, and then you gave up security to fly to a different state and to talk to these people. So now once you got that recipe to the right scale, what was that journey like for you from that point to the company being viable?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's interesting because a lot of times people think, oh yeah, like you just created a brand and like you produced it and then you ran with it and then it grew. But there's so many of like the behind the scenes stories of like how it almost didn't happen, or how like this fell through, or how, I'm like crying in the corner of my bedroom thinking, why did I ever think this was a good idea? And I think one of those was that once I got the production formula and the company was awesome, I was going to launch with one flavor and we decided to launch with another one, which I was so grateful for because I could only afford to launch with one. And that was the ginger vanilla lime, which was the best decision I made because people love ginger. And ginger vanilla lime flavor has always been our best seller over 10 years. So that's the one we decided to run with. I contacted the bottling plant. We made an agreement, and I was to have the product a month before a trade show, which was actually the same trade show that I went to in California, but on the East Coast. So it goes twice a year, once on the East and once on the West. So I was actually gonna have my own booth. So I was like really excited. And a week before we were supposed to run, they called me and they said that they just made a decision to up their production run from the small amount that I was planning to do to 4,000 cases. And that anybody that was planning to do less, they were not going to run. And I had already paid for the trade show to go, and it was going to be in a month. And I had a complete meltdown because I was like, where am I going to produce this product now? I'm already committed to the trade show. And I just, again, was like, okay, I have to find an alternative. And luckily I did. However, the only day that they could run was the day of setup of the trade show.
Oh gosh. Oh, that's not stressful at all.
No, not at all. I guess the advantage was that the plant was in Boston and the trade show, well, outside of Boston in Waltham. And so the trade show was in Boston. So they both were in Massachusetts.
Oh, good.
So that, it just ironically happened to be that way. But still, this is the first time I'm running my product ever. And I'm going to take the product and set up that same day in the trade show. And I still remember this moment because we did the U-Haul rent-a-van for like $19.99. And we picked it up in where I live in Pennsylvania. And we're driving to Massachusetts, my husband and I. And I said, who does this? Like seriously, who does this? And he was like, you do.
Like, I'm sitting next to her doing it.
I'm like, this is crazy. It was so insanely crazy that we had to leave like super early in the morning, and we were planned to run at like 10. Setup ended. You could only get in to the venue, the center by 5. So we had to get in. Once you're in, you're okay. But like we had to get in. So I had that deadline. So it's like we had to run, get the product, put it in the van, and then drive into Boston, and then get into, the center, and then start to set up. And we started off rough in the beginning. Like the formulation was off a little bit, but I was able to change it. We started production. That moment was very cool to see the idea that I had, like the bottles coming down the production line with my label and, everything. And it tastes really good. So, I was thankfully like really excited, but the stress was beyond like anything I could ever imagine. But, seeing that moment for me, like it took, pictures, and it was a really exciting moment for all the hard work that I had over the months and months to get there. And so because we don't use preservatives, it goes through a tunnel pasteurizer, which is essentially a long tunnel that sprays hot water, like 140-degree water on the product, and then it goes through a cool down. And that's what that's what gives it the preservative, so you don't have to, have it refrigerated without anything, unnatural. However, when you're supposed to let it sit for like a day to essentially cool down. So this is kind of the funny story is we had to load up the van immediately after it got off the production line from the cases and put it in the van. And we had all these cases in the van driving to Boston, and it got like over 100 degrees in the van because of the cases of process.
I was like, did you have like serious like steam sauna happening behind
We
you?
have the windows open. I was like, I said to my husband, I'm like, no, but I'm sorry, there's nobody that I know that ever do this craziness ever.
Now, what's really cool about your company is it starts in your kitchen. You go through all of these challenges, but then at some point you tipped and got into a world of celebrities and doing things like that. So how did you get from the trade show world, which is a completely different world?
Yeah.
That's a hustle and grind world right there.
Yeah.
How did you get from that to your first like celebrity event?
Yeah, I mean, I guess for me, I guess I'm kind of relentless with, what my mind doesn't stop. So it's just like, doing everything that I can to help grow my business. And it's thinking outside of the box, like doing, researching different events, reading stories about people that are like into, so like, I remember reading this story about Tori Spelling and how she was like growing this organic garden. And it was like, oh, I have an organic beverage. She would like that. So like I reached out to her, and then we connected, and like she was like, can you send me some? I sent her some, and then she sent me this email back about how much she loved it. And I was like, can I use your quote, like on my website? And she said yes. So I guess it's just kind of like thinking outside of the box and like different ideas that you can do to like, grow your business.
How long was your journey, like from your kitchen to that production date in the hot van?
Surprisingly, it was a little less than a year.
Oh, wow.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it's because I kind of already had the beverage like concepts that I wanted to do already, because I had been doing them for 2 years with Eco Bar.
Yeah.
So I kind of already knew, and it was great because I got great market research from people. When you set to do a product, it's like, who do you get to help you, figure out, is this like taste good or not? But I was already doing that at the events. So I had like hundreds of people at the events, like telling me their feedback without me knowing that this is actually what I was going to be creating, in the future. And I would have my friends over and we would do like tasting parties, and, they were like, sign me up. I want to come over, make me a cocktail. I'll be a taste tester. And so they were like super supportive of me too. And that's kind of like my other advice is like, surround yourself with people that have your back, that, will support you, and are positive thinkers that, want you to be successful, and are really, have that positive way of thinking of like, yeah, you know what, I think if you work hard, like you can do this. And that was really beneficial for me too.
What, I was thinking, when somebody does something like this, like, what was your why? Did you have like was there something driving you? Was it just the belief in the product, or was there something else that kind of brought you to that place of like, I have to do this?
I think initially it was actually my friends encouraging me when I was saying like, I don't know what to do. They're like, well, you love to entertain, you love to make cocktails. Like, I think there's something there. And I think that really resonated with me because, as we were saying before, it's like sometimes we don't see things in ourselves, but our friends or people from the outside like see that. And so that got me to thinking, I was like, yeah, you know what? I think I could do something like this. And so that was kind of the initial prompt. But even when I first like created Eco Bar, like the concept of Eco Bar, I didn't know what that was going to be. It was just a website for me to put up my organic cocktails and my ideas of like what I mix when I have parties. And my husband was, like, what is this? I don't really understand. And, unfortunately wasn't really sort of like a big proponent of, what I was setting out to do. So again, as I reflect, I think in some ways, while it wasn't supportive and it did bother me at times, in a reverse way, it's like, no, I am going to do this. And yeah, this may be a crazy idea. Like, I remember when I came up with the SIPP label and I was so excited, and I didn't actually have the formula yet. I just had like the label. Like I said, I printed it out and glued it on a bottle. And he was like, well, my husband was like, yeah, that's great, but you don't even have a product. So I don't understand, like, why do you have this label? And I think it goes back to what you were saying earlier too. It's like, things are done in certain ways for people. It's like, you don't necessarily have to have everything all set in stone. Like, okay, before I come up with my name, I should have the actual product. I should know where I'm putting it in, know everything. And then I'll come up with a label design. Maybe the label design inspires you to do what you're supposed to do next. And that's the way I found that's the way I work.
Right.
And probably other people do too. And I think sometimes people, and I have to say women in particular, kind of get hung up on this idea of like, well, if I don't have everything, lined up, then I don't know if this is going to work. I don't think I should give this a shot. Like, I need to be better prepared. I need to understand this better.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it's just going with your gut and just going for it. And then things kind of like fall into place.
I think that's an incredible mindset. I think about all the things that we, when you have children, nobody gives you a book for that.
No. No classes.
No guidance whatsoever, except for all the horror stories. People only tell you the horror stories.
That's true.
So, I mean, let's give ourselves some credit, right? So
Yeah.
you didn't have the full support, but then as the years went on, how long did you stay at the helm of SIPP? Like, what was your time journey on that?
So, fortunately, my in-laws gave me, they invested in my company. And I was very fortunate for that because I didn't have it. I tried, everybody I knew, but they did. So, but it was a small amount, but it was enough to get me to do that first production run, to get me to do that first trade show, and to get me to start, getting into some distribution, which that meant me selling cases of my product out of my car, door to door to stores. So I tried to get a distributor, and the distributors were like, well, how many customers do you have? I'm like, well, I have, 5 here, and 10 here. And like, that was pretty much it. And I was like, proud of myself. They're like, no, you need to have a lot more customers. How many? I asked them. 50. So that was my goal. I set to sell 50 accounts on my own. And then I took the names of those stores to the distributor, and I said, here, and I gave them a list. And I was like, I am giving you these customers. They are buying SIPP. So they said, okay. So that was my first distributor, and I stopped selling, thank God, from my car. This was really hard. And I had to rent vans, and we went into Philadelphia and like spent the day dropping off, 2-3 cases here and there. But it's what you have to do. And the distributor was impressed. They said, these are customers we would like to have. And so they took over the distribution. So then it was like, okay, now how do I continue to build a business further from there, gain more distribution? And so I got a couple more distributors after that. And then I went to a trade show with the last bit of the money that I had from my in-laws. Was either I do one more production run with the money and then try to sell it and then make a profit and then put that profit in to keep the business going, which was unrealistic. And I'm so glad that I didn't make that decision, because you only make a very small percentage in beverage. Or I do the trade show, put the money in there, and then hope that I meet an investor. So that's what I did. There was a group of guys that came the first day of the trade show, and they were talking to me, and then they like backed off, and I didn't know who they were. They didn't say who they were. And then the second day they came back again. I was like, that's weird. And then they were talking amongst themselves, and then they walked away. And then the third day they came back, and finally I just went up and I was like, hello, I'm Beth. I'm the founder of SIPP. And who are you?
What do you keep staring at me every day for?
And they're like, well, actually, we're an investment group, and we are here looking for a beverage to invest in. We've tried every beverage in the whole show over the past 3 days, and yours is by far the best. We would like to talk to you. And I was like, how does that even happen? Like, that was just crazy to me. And I was kind of like downplaying it, because I was like, like we have very small revenue, because they were venture capital. So it's like when you're starting off in a company, usually you find like an angel investor in the startup sort of mode, but they were venture capital, which typically they wouldn't invest in a company unless they were like at $1 million in revenue or above.
Right. Okay.
I think at that point I was like $125,000 in revenue, which is nothing. And so I told them, I was honest. I was like, hey, I know you guys are venture capital. Like, this is where I'm at. And they were like, I know this is out of the norm, but we love it, and we would love to continue a conversation. So 8 months later, after a bunch of due diligence and many conversations and meetings, they did their first round of investment, which was very exciting. It enabled us to grow our distribution, change our branding and packaging, and then launch additional flavors. So that went on. That helped us for that year. And then they did a second and a third round of investment over the next 5 years. And enabled us to continue to grow, add staff to the company, and, grow the company to a multi-million-dollar business. And me running the company was, it enabled me to see like, okay, I could do this. Like, I had this idea, but now I'm running this company. I have 10 employees, and, we're successful, and we're growing revenue year over year. And then last year, I created a brand extension of SIPP that was a sparkling water, to kind of compete with like LaCroix. And we did that brand extension. I formulated it all. Our team loved it. we were getting ready to launch, and I went for a meeting to discuss how we were going to do the launch of this brand extension. And unbeknown to me, I went and then was pushed out of my own company from my investment group. So
Wow.
was devastated. Was pretty devastating.
So at what point did you think I should write a book? Because when I met you, was it only a year ago?
It was a year ago, yeah.
I could have sworn it was 2. That is the craziest thing.
Yeah.
Don't rely on me with time, hence the time. So a year ago when I met you, my family was talking to you, you really didn't have a strong direction because you
Right.
were still dealing with that
The
situation.
transition.
Correct?
Yep. I was still dealing with the transition. Wasn't really sure what I wanted to do. I had people saying like, well, you should just start another beverage company. You should consult with other beverage companies and help them do what you did. So I was kind of in that transitional period and not really, like I said, seeing maybe the value of the story that I had and like how it could potentially help other people, specifically women.
Mm-hmm.
And that event showed me that I need to write this story. And actually on the flight home from Arizona from the event that we were at, I pulled out my laptop and I started writing, and I just started writing month after month after month. And it wasn't anything that I really had to think about. Like I didn't, like people were saying, oh my God, I can't believe you're writing a book. And I think like a lot of people say they're writing a book, right? Like there's how many books are half done, 3/4 done. And I was thinking, oh yeah, I might be that person. It was like, I'm writing a book for like 2 years. Yeah, I'm still writing it.
No, you really pulled the trigger quick, because when you and I talked that day, the last day of the event, you said you were thinking about writing a book. You told me the concept and I was like, you totally should do this and I want to read the book. And so how did you just decide to write the book and go with it because you had such a strong vision? And what was your purpose in writing the book?
I had a really, I'm telling you, that event, like it was unexpected, sort of life-changing for me. I left feeling a feeling that I hadn't felt before. I hadn't felt for a long time. Probably not since I had started SIPP, 8-9 years prior. That feeling of like, of like I felt passionate about something. This is what I want to do. And it was knowing that like these stories that I have to share, personal and business, because I also was going through a divorce at the time. So, in talking about my transition from not only the business, but also the change in my personal life after being married for 18 years. And I felt like I had worked hard on that over the past 2 years too. So I kind of had like both. And I just felt like it just came out. I just started writing, and I was writing through the night. And so I had people saying like, oh, do you have writer's block? I'm like, no, I really don't. It got a little crazy because I was actually writing through the night. And when my son got up to he's in college, when he got up to go to class at 6:00 in the morning, he was like, wait, don't tell me you're still sitting here from last night. And I was like, oh my God, it's 6 a.m. And I just got into a zone. Like I was in a total zone. So it definitely was a story that was inside of me that needed to come out. And I guess I just really didn't even know that it was there, but it was inspired by, people like you and other people that I've met.
Awesome. So tell us about your book. What part of your story is the book? Like, you know what I mean? Like you got pushed out of this company.
Yeah.
Your marriage fell apart, right? I mean,
yeah.
you had a ton of stress point transitions.
Yeah. Yeah.
So was this a cathartic part of your journey? Was this like a journal that you decided to share with the world?
Yeah. I mean, I think you're right. That's exactly, I think you hit the nail on the head. It's like, there's stories, and then there's like things that I did to move myself through to get through those things. And then tips at the end of each chapter. So each chapter kind of focuses on different aspects. So one chapter is Sipping the Dream, which is all about the chapter of how I created SIPP. So some of the things that I just talked about was in there. And then there's another chapter about loss, which is me going through losing my dad from brain cancer and some challenges that I had from that. And then learning that like life is so short, like you have to live it, because it came out of nowhere for him. He was completely healthy, and this just came out of nowhere. So there's like different sort of portions or aspects of my life that I went through that I felt were important to touch on. So each chapter kind of like goes through that, like, comparing yourself to other people. That was a big thing that I had to overcome. I always felt like, oh, they have it better. This person's got it going on. I got into that mindset for years, and it was really, really, it's really dangerous when you get to that point.
Toxic.
Yeah. So I call it comparisonitis, and that's what I have the phrase in my book. So, there's a topic about that. There's, about self-love and self-affirmation and like the things that we say to ourselves, like that negative self-talk that we do.
Yeah.
We don't even realize we're doing it, and how bad that is. And like, kind of how to overcome, some of those obstacles.
So was it kind of part, I guess, therapy for you and part mission?
Yeah.
Obviously I have the book, but there's people out there that need the book.
Yeah.
Help them to understand your journey of writing. You had never written a book before, right? This was like you just going for it.
Yes. Yeah.
What was that journey like?
I mean, it was, like you said, it was very cathartic. It's like, even if I wrote until 4 a.m. or 5 a.m. in the morning, and I would go to bed and I would get up at like 8, so I'd have 3 or 4 hours of sleep. When I went to bed at night, like I never felt so like just so like, I'm trying to think of the word that I want to say, like free. And I think it's because I just wrote for like 8, 10 straight hours. And there's something about that feeling is like when you go to bed and you have all that like out, it's all out of your head, and it's like I would go to bed and just like fall asleep like that, because I realized like how important writing is. And I had been journaling once I started to go through my separation, I went to there's a chapter called The Therapist, which is a really good chapter. I highly recommend a therapist. So when I started to go to my therapist, when I was going through my separation, I started to journal, and I realized the power of journaling, and I would write every night. And so what I was doing was like journaling on steroids.
It's like uncluttering, right? When you journal, it literally unclutters your brain. Even if you're not making sense on paper,
right?
Still, like, have you ever journaled and you're like, blah, 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 squirrel. And you're like, it's all kind of like you threw thoughts in a blender.
Yeah.
All of a sudden there's this point where you just kind of, like your thoughts stop being scattered and you start to really kind of sink into maybe the thing that's behind all that nonsense.
Yes.
Did the book have that same feel for you?
It did. And it was like 10 times that. Like I said, it's like journaling on steroids, because it's like you're not just journaling for half an hour. You're like journaling for like 8 straight hours. And then like you go to bed and it's like this sense of peace. That's the word I was trying to think of. It's like a sense of peace. It's like all these things, I'm writing about my past, some experiences that I've gone through with, my stepfather was abusive to my mom, and so there's things in my past that like I've never really spoken about. Like I've even had friends read the book and they're like, I didn't even know this about you. Like I didn't know that was in your past. So there were things that, I was brave. I wrote about things that were scary and vulnerable. And every time I was writing it, I was thinking like, I have to be vulnerable, because if I'm not, then I'm not going to help women. If I'm not truth, and if I'm not speaking the truth and tell, and that was my goal. If I could just help one woman change her life, like maybe who's in a bad marriage, and she was like, you know what, this woman did it. I'm doing it. I'm standing up for myself. I'm creating a business, or I'm stepping away, or I'm going to live with my mom to get away from him, or, whatever that change is, that's what I wanted to inspire. And that's what kept me going, writing every night. It was like, I'm doing this because yes, while I guess the side effect was helping myself, because it was cathartic. The main mission was to help other women to, go through the journey. And it's not to say that my life is perfect now. And like, I know all the answers to everything. And like, I created a business and I got away from my marriage and I'm, now single and I'm happy. There were days and times where, it's a struggle. And the funny thing is that I would go back and read my own book. On days that I was struggling, I was like, wait a minute, I wrote it. And I would go back and like read what I wrote, and it would actually help myself.
I love that. I am my own, I am my own help. I just talked to me and me. We had this conversation. I feel like that's my life though. I tell my family, I'm like, you guys aren't here. I'm like, come on, Gina, get it together. What is your problem? Like literally, I talk to myself out loud, and it's like, maybe I should write a book, but not for anybody but me. What do you call it? Deep Thoughts by Gina for Gina.
In a strange way, it does help. It's just like, because I was feeling like, one day I was like feeling down about myself, and I'm like, oh, I can't do this thing, whatever it was I was thinking I was going to do. And I was like, wait a minute, I'm writing a women's empowerment book right now. Yes. Like, get it together. I gotta go, do this. And then I would read what I was writing and then kind of write on top of that. So it definitely helped. But to answer your question, it definitely was every night I was writing, I just remember envisioning women reading it and feeling like a chapter or two resonated with them, and it made a difference in their life.
That's so incredible. And really, I know you and I both know this. You put something out in the world, right?
Yeah.
You can't measure that impact. There's a certain leap of faith that you take in putting something out into the world.
Yeah.
You share your personal story.
It's scary.
Next level, right?
Yeah. It's really scary. And there was one chapter that I wrote. It's the I Am Enough chapter. It's called Mirror, Mirror. So it's like, what do you say to yourself when you look in the mirror? And normally it's negative, and that's right. It is what it is. So that's what the chapter is about. It's called Mirror, Mirror, but it's about the story. The concept of it is I am enough. And so I wrote this chapter, and I was like, I think it was maybe the 8th or 9th chapter that I wrote, and I have 14 chapters. So I was like, so proud of it. And I sent it to my editor, and I was like, this is it. This is the kick-ass chapter. Like, this is going to help women. I know it. Like, I have so much information in this chapter. So he's like, great, I'm excited to read it. Then 2 days later, I got an email back from him, and he was like, well, I think that this chapter is great. I think that you did not go deep enough. And I was like, oh my gosh, I'm like the worst writer ever.
Because I suck at life.
Every other feedback I got from him was like, wow, he's like, this is so inspirational. Like, this is going to help somebody. So all of a sudden, out of the blue, the one chapter that I think is like the best chapter ever, I get this feedback of like, I don't really know. I was like, what's going on? So then he ended up, explaining to me further. He was like, I think you're afraid to go deeper in this chapter. Like, there's more there to go.
You're like, ouch.
I know. And I was like, oh, I don't think so then I'm sitting there. Actually, this is the one time where I was on my laptop, and I was like, I got nothing. I don't know where to go with this. And then I went to my therapist the next day, and we were talking about it. And I was like, and my editor thinks that I didn't write this chapter. He was like, oh my gosh, Beth. Like, he's like, that's not it. He's true. He's like, he's true. Like, you need to go deeper. What you were talking about, this thing about how, when you were a teenager and you didn't feel you were enough, why didn't you feel you were enough? Where does that come? Was there a story that, and then all of a sudden this whole story just came to me, and I just started crying, and I cried for like 3 straight hours. Wow. I cried all the way home. I cried when I got home. And then that night I wrote the story, and I put in the chapter, and I sent it to my editor, and he was like, now that's what I'm talking about.
Like 3 hours of crying and 8 hours of writing. You're like, great. Do you want my friend too?
So needless to say, it was quite a journey. And once it was published, I was very proud of, all the work. And so it's out there now.
Now we've got this book, and you're on that next level journey for you.
Yeah.
And
And
there's,
so that was like, what I've been going on a book tour, which has been great. I've been to Austin and Miami and Maryland and New York, and I'm going to Maine next weekend for a cancer retreat, and I'll be selling my books there.
is
And
Melissa going to be there?
she is, yeah. Yep. So we're both going to that. It's called Warrior Revolution, and I'm really excited about that. And then the next weekend, I'm going to be in Atlanta at the What Women Want conference, and I'm going to be speaking and also be selling my book there. So this has kind of been my journey now, is just like, speaking, talking about it, sharing my book with other women. But through this process of like putting my book out there, another kind of unexpected thing happened, which was women encouraging me to create another beverage brand. They're like, you have to, you should do this. Like you should go for it. And I think this is time. And so it really resonated with me just this past month for the first time. I've thought about it. I've been helping other entrepreneurs with their beverages over the past year, which has been awesome. I love it. But finally it resonated with me, and I'm like, I think it's time. So I'm starting off on the journey of creating a new beverage brand. I don't know where it will take me. Again, going through this whole, story of like creating the beverages in my kitchen. I just started doing that this past 2 weeks, which was kind of cool, because I was like, wow, this is like deja vu, like 10 years ago.
Yeah.
But it brought up that whole like creativeness that I love, that what started me when I first started SIPP. So I don't know where the journey will take me, but I'm going to give it a shot.
Well, I am super excited to have your story go out again on a platform, sharing my friendship and my admiration for you. And just, I want to honor you for sharing such a very personal and very intimate part of your journey with us, and for being willing to put yourself out there and share that with the world.
Yeah.
I honor you for that, because that vulnerability, I think, really is your strength.
Yeah. Thank you. I appreciate it. It's not anything I would imagine I would have done 10 years ago. I was I've always been shy and kind of like to myself. So it's been an interesting learning process and journey along the way. And I'm just so grateful that I have people like you in my life that, we're all here to help each other rise up, and be the best that we can be, and inspire each other and encourage each other to follow our passions and, share our stories. It's important.
And I think you mentioned this earlier, that we don't see the value of our own story. We have a
Yes.
tendency to undervalue ours and overvalue
Yeah.
everyone else's, right?
Absolutely.
But yet you sharing your story has actually been the most powerful part of your process, wouldn't you agree?
Yes. If I think about like what happened to me and how devastated I was, in transitioning away from SIPP, which was what I had known for 9 years of my life. And if I stayed in my shell and didn't share my story with people, I don't know where I would be right now. And so you're right. It's like, by me opening up and sharing the story and then publishing the book and putting it out there, I think it's now going to continue on, as the stepping stone to something else. And that's why I think it's really important to put it out there. And especially, there's so many women that are going through things behind the scenes that we don't know about, and they don't have somebody to connect with to help encourage them. They're isolated. I was isolated for years in my marriage. And so that's my other hope, is by my book, by you doing this, with your YouTube and sharing our stories, that if one woman watches this, and it changes them or inspires them to say, you know what, I'm making a change in my life and getting out of this, then it's all worth it.
It is all worth it. I totally agree. So I want to thank you so much for joining me today, Beth, and for sharing your story. And of course, I get a front row seat to watch all the amazing things that you do. So thanks again for saying yes to me today.
Thanks, Gina. I so appreciate it.
It's my pleasure. Talk to you soon.